I'm Lizzie Harrison for Card Player TV, here today with David Oppenheim. I'm really glad you could make it by.
Glad to be here.
So we brought you by today because we want to talk about pre-flop starting hand strategies, basically, across the board in cash games. I know you play a lot of cash games. How do you decide what hands you're going to be playing?
Well, I can only tell you how I learned, and I'm pretty sure that it's kind of different for everyone. The first games that I started playing were like limit hold'em and also limit lowball, and basically I kind of learned the basic, correct, positive EV starting hands.
Right.
Which is like, especially for limit hold'em when you first start playing. For me it was a really tight way to play. I'm pretty sure people do that differently. That's the way it worked for me. As I got better, I was kind of able to change my range of hands, deviate my play. And as you get better, as a general rule, I think you can play more hands. When you first start playing and you're a beginner, you really kind of want to be pretty stringent on the hands that you play.
So how important is position in relation to your starting hands?
Position is everything, I mean,
the requirements just go down as your position gets better?
Yeah, I mean, as your position gets better, basically you're playing, instead of playing a 9-handed game, you're now going to be playing a 5-handed game or a 4-handed game. And, clearly your starting hand requirements become, a lot.
So what about raising pre-flop? I mean, what percentage of the time do you think you'd be putting in a raise pre-flop?
Well, I think that, that all depends on the game that you're playing for starters.
Right.
I think it's different for Hold'em and Omaha 8 or better, for example, as flop games. I think like Omaha 8 or better as a whole limping is much more conducive to that game. Whereas in limit Hold'em, I would say that I probably raise when coming in, when I'm the original bring-in, I would say a good 80% of the time.
And do you always have a hand? I mean, when you're making a raise like that, or is that
when I first started playing, I always had like a legitimate hand.
Right.
As my poker game evolved, I kind of can, pretty much play, depending on my position, a lot worse hand than when I first started playing.
Because your range of hand is just able to open up because you have more skill to control the pot?
Yeah, I just have better feel, and I have more skill.
Right. So how do you control the size of the pot pre-flop? Can you start it there? Everyone always talks about small ball poker, but does it start pre-flop?
I think mostly the small ball poker is basically talked about for no limit.
Okay.
Tournaments and stuff like that, and that's a whole different game. And basically your pre-flop requirements are kind of dictated by your chip position and the size of the blind. When you first start a tournament, you have a gazillion chips. You're able to play a lot more hands than as the tournament goes on. You become short stacked.
Well, as you play in bigger cash games, and now you play in the biggest cash games, does the pre-flop play get more intense, more complex?
I would say the pre-flop play is more aggressive, and your opponents put a lot more pressure on you pre-flop than they would in
right.
smaller games.
So how do you determine when you're going to make a call if everyone at the table is just so aggressive?
It's really like a feel type of situation, and I wish I could give you like a more definitive answer, but for me, it really is situational. It depends on how I'm doing in the game, how my opponents are doing, if there's a maniac behind me,
right.
Who's steaming or is doing well, I might not play a hand that I would play at another time. If I kind of feel that I'm taking control of the table, I'll probably play a lot more hands pre-flop. So there's, when you get to like the biggest cash games, there really is no definitive answer on like what to play. It's really the situation that dictates, how you're going to play and what you're going to play.
This is another kind of general question, but what do you think about slow playing really big hands pre-flop?
I think it's okay to do, occasionally. I remember somebody pointing out like a thing in Dan Harrington's book for his tournament where he would limp with aces if he looked at his watch and it was like 1/6 of the time. So if his watch was like between the 50 and the 0, that's when he would limp with it. So that would be like a random
right.
1/5 of the time. I think that's a decent general rule. For the most part, I think, especially if you're an aggressive player, you're better off raising with your big hands, because if you're an aggressive player, they're not really putting you on that hand anyways, and you might get someone to make a gigantic mistake.
Great. Thank you very much for coming by today, David.
Okay, thank you guys for having me.
I'm Lizzie Harrison with David Oppenheim for Card Players TV.